So we are going to discuss about starving and fasting. So this is a very important topic from metabolism, and we need to understand these basic concepts for any competitive exam. So before we get to know about the fasting, we should know what happens in the body and what happens to the metabolism during the fed state. That means when you take food. So basically in the fed state, the main hormone that is released is insulin. So what insulin does is it helps in storage of lipid, protein, and glycogen. And the main function of insulin is basically glycolysis in body. The second function is it promotes aerobic respiration. So this is a picture you can see. This is the liver, this is the skeletal muscle, and this is the adipose cells, adipose tissue cells. So you can clearly see in the liver from the glucose, glycolysis happens and glucose is converted into acetyl CoA, and from that it can get converted to fatty acids or cholesterol, and these fatty acids can further get converted to triglycerides, which can deposit in the adipose tissue as a storage form. So that is the main function of the insulin here. Also, the same glucose can get converted to glycogen by the process of glycogenesis. So which is another storage form. Insulin, this happens again. Insulin promotes glycogenesis also. And insulin also promotes storage of protein. So how does this insulin molecule basically work? So if you notice, this is the insulin molecule which gets attached to the insulin receptor in the cell membrane. This receptor then stimulates other pathways for various actions of insulin. One of the many is activating the glucose transporter 4, which actually helps glucose molecules to enter into the cytoplasm. Then this insulin activating the insulin receptor itself can help this glucose get converted to glycogen, which is storage form, as we have seen in the previous picture. And this happens basically in the liver. And this insulin will again convert glucose to pyruvate, and this pyruvate can get converted to fatty acid. That is also another function of insulin. So this is a graph showing the insulin level, and which is, we can see here the insulin is released in two phases basically. This is the first phase and this is the second phase of insulin release. So in first phase there is always a peak, you can see, and then from the beginning of the second phase there is a constant rise in the insulin level. So the first graph actually shows insulin release in a normal glucose tolerance patient. If any patient is having impaired glucose tolerance, this graph, this insulin amount is reduced. See, the release of the insulin gets reduced. And in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, it is very minimal, the response. So these all things are part of fed state. Now let's go to the next. Now let's discuss about the fasting state. That means when we are in between meals. So the primary hormone that acts in this state is glucagon. The next hormone which acts is epinephrine. So this glucagon and epinephrine, they both basically stimulate the use of reserves, body reserves, reserves of fat, protein, and glycogen. So just the opposite action of insulin basically. So these hormones, they promote hepatic glycogenolysis, then they promote hepatic gluconeogenesis, that is production of glucose from any non-glucose, non-carbohydrate entity, that is known as the gluconeogenesis. Glycogenolysis means from glycogen it is broken down to glucose released in the blood. And on a minor note or a minor scale, release of free fatty acids from the adipose tissue. So in this picture we can see the mechanism of action of glucagon and epinephrine. So this is the hepatic cell, membrane, where we can see this glucagon receptor, which is a G protein coupled receptor, and also one receptor for epinephrine that we can see here. So what happens is this glucagon binds with the hepatic glucagon receptor, and this in turn basically activates the adenylase cyclase. This adenylase cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP. This cyclic AMP in turn activates the protein kinase A. So this is the main molecule, protein kinase A, which phosphorylates the downstream enzymes. So catabolic processes like gluconeogenesis, and glycogenolysis, etc. And also these downstream enzymes, they basically inhibit the anabolic processes. So all these things happen in the fasting state. Now, what happens if you continue fasting? So starvation day, from day 1 to day 3, what happens? So the glycogen reserves, they are basically depleted after the day 1. So the blood glucose levels are maintained by mainly glycogenolysis that is going on, and the adipose release of free fatty acid, these two processes. And the third process, which we have discussed previously, is hepatic gluconeogenesis, which is also happening simultaneously. This gluconeogenesis, actually what happens, there are two tissues. From the peripheral tissue, the lactate and alanine are converted to glucose, and from the adipose tissue, the glycerol and propionyl CoA, they are converted also to the glucose by this process. So you must remember here, this propionyl CoA, it is the only triacyl glycerol component which contributes to gluconeogenesis. So in this graph, we can see what happens after hours of fasting. So the first thing we can notice is the plasma insulin levels. It goes down with time. The second thing you can see, the plasma glucagon levels, it rises up with time. Can you follow? And you can also see as the plasma insulin level falls down and the plasma glucagon level goes up, you can see the blood glucose level here. Blood glucose level goes down. As soon as it is going down, the plasma glucagon level starts rising up to maintain the blood glucose at a base level. And due to the action of this plasma glucagon, you can see the plasma free fatty acids, they rise up. And also, due to hours of fasting, at the end, blood ketone bodies will be also rising up. So we must remember some important facts here. So RBCs, they basically have no mitochondria. So they cannot use ketone bodies as their energy source during fasting state. And muscle and liver, they basically shift their fuel metabolism. They shift to free fatty acids for their energy. Now, suppose someone is starving for more than 3 days now. So what happens there is all the glycogen stores are now depleted by day 1, and all the other processes are also getting exhausted. Your body is now trying to convert all the fat that you have in your store, the adipose tissues, they produce ketone bodies now. And these ketone bodies become the main source of energy for the brain. After that, the vital protein degradation starts. So all the vital proteins in the body starts denaturing. And this degradation leads to organ failure and is the main cause of death in case of starvation after 3 days. So how much someone will survive in this condition? The survival time basically depends on the stores that person having in his body. So as a summary, if we see in the fat state, the main fuel source is food. So after eating, the blood glucose will rise, and this will lead to insulin release. And this insulin will cause all the anabolic processes like protein synthesis, glycogenesis, and de novo lipogenesis. Whereas in the fasting state, blood glucose falls, and the main fuel source is actually stored glycogen or fat. So this will lead to release of glucagon, and it will shut off insulin system. So this glucagon will lead to catabolic processes like autophagy, glycogenolysis, lipolysis, etc. So this lipolysis will also convert free fatty acid to ketones. So the new concept of intermittent fasting, which is very popular nowadays. So scientifically, how we can explain intermittent fasting? So what happens during this intermittent fasting? So during the fat state, it starts when you start eating. It lasts for 3 to 5 hours. Then there is a post-absorptive state. So this time the body is not processing a meal. It lasts until 8 to 12 hours after your last meal. And there is fast. So after 12 hours of your last meal, the natural fat burning state starts. So that's why in intermittent fasting, you will see people are fasting for more than 16 hours and so. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel for more.